There have been fresh clashes right now between Palestinian protesters and Israeli forces at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And at the same time, at this point, over 150 rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territories. Dozens of injuries have stemmed from these rocket attacks. And also, dozens of these rockets have been intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system. I'd like to now turn to our next guest, al-Omari, a former Palestinian negotiator, to get a sense of the Palestinian perspective as this unrest continues. Now, you know, I spoke about this in my interview beforehand, but you weren't able to hear it probably. Israel's plans to evict at least 70 Palestinians from the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah on Thursday sparked major clashes in Jerusalem. Was that announcement the true trigger of the unrest that we're seeing today? What do you say to those who just call this nothing more than a real estate dispute?
First of all, I mean, anyone who calls this as a real estate dispute or a legal dispute is either disingenuous or is overly simplifying the issue. You know, a real estate dispute would not make it to the UN Security Council, would not require a US administration statement, would not require Jordanian, Emirati, Bahraini, Egyptian intervention. So this is clearly a highly political, highly emotive issue. Now, in terms of, though, the motivation of firing the rockets, I mean, you have to look at the very complex political reality we see on the Palestinian scene. Mm-hmm. You know, part of the picture is what you just alluded to, the tensions in Jerusalem, whether it's Sheikh Jarrah, whether it is in the Old City, the Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount, all of these things. There is already mounting anger against Israel. Then you take a different angle and you see a lot of domestic Palestinian tension. After the cancellation of the elections, there is general public dissatisfaction with the Palestinian Authority. The Fatah-Hamas split is even deeper now than it was before. So this is the context. For Hamas firing these rockets, partly it wants to respond to a feeling of anger in the street. Partly it wants to establish itself in its own competition with Fatah as who is the most popular, who is the most proactive actor in the scene. So this is a complex reality. This is something that frankly is frightening. It could spin out of control in Gaza itself. It could spin out of control outside Gaza.
Right. So you mentioned, you know, the political aspects of this rocket fire. You know, every time there's an escalation, Hamas resorts to rocket fire. Do you think that this is an effective way of achieving Palestinian statehood? And how does the Palestinian public feel about the rocket fire that's coming from the Gaza Strip? Is it an instigation that's widely supported?
I mean, first of all, I mean, my own view, my personal view, of course, this is not an acceptable way. I mean, first of all, it's not effective to achieve liberation. And secondly, even if it were effective, it's immoral. So this is something that is clearly, I find, unacceptable. In terms of the general public, you actually have a split or a spectrum, if you wish. If you ask people on a normal, calm day, many would tell you that violence is not the way to move forward, even though in recent months we're seeing more and more support for violence if you look at opinion polls. Today, though, in the middle of a highly emotional, highly emotive situation, then you see more support for this kind of violence. And what we saw, for example, in the exchange of fire, we've seen also Palestinian casualties. Palestinian media is talking about children being in the among the casualties. We don't know the full story, but these kinds of things create a vicious cycle. People who would have normally been against this would, by and large, find it support it as a way of expressing revenge. So we're in this very highly, emotional, emotive moment, and this is where you need leadership to de-escalate and leadership to kind of channel some of the energies into a more constructive way.
Well, the question is, where this is all headed at this point. Those visuals, by the way, that everybody was just seeing right now are actually live from Jerusalem, so you can see that people are still out on the streets. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us some of your perspective.